Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Today, I've got John Pullman, Ducks Unlimited magazine contributor. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Grace. Good to be with you.
And I asked John to join me today to kind of rehash and go over an old piece that John, I say an old piece, it's probably only 2 or 3 years old, that John did for us on ducks.org. It's called Lifetime Skills for the Waterfowl Hunter. And this is, really kind of, it's a learning tool. It's a, something to look at is like almost even the progression of a hunter. But these are some of the fundamentals that you kind of reached out to different experts to find out exactly what this process of learning and developing and becoming a duck hunter, not only what it is, but what are the steps to go by. And one of the first ones is really, what everyone thinks about with duck hunting. Even when you see commercials made on TV that people don't even know what they're talking about in duck hunting, they always have a call, and there's a duck call. It's almost like the symbol of being a duck hunter. Kind of talk about duck calling and the transition of learning to becoming an expert, and then also to really having that as a lifetime skill for a hunter.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, just on a personal note, duck calling it's absolutely my favorite part. It's my favorite aspect of a hunt. Being able to know that you, watching the reaction of the birds as you're making some sounds on the call, and knowing that you're in some way impacting their behavior and bringing them closer and putting them into shotgun range, it's my favorite part. And I love the sounds. I could sit and listen to one of my favorite things is to pull up to the marsh or whatever before shooting light early in the morning and just rolling the window down and listen to those birds on the water, whether it's, hen mallards just sounding off or widgeon or wood ducks or whatever it is. I love duck calls. I love duck calling. It's just absolutely my favorite thing. And so, for the piece, when I wrote it, I talked to Barney Califf, and Barney's, 3-time world duck calling champion. And he's been around the block a long time as a duck caller. And, you sit and listen to Barney or any of these guys that do competition calling, and whether it's Main Street Stuttgart or wherever they're at, and they roll out these fancy routines and these high balls and these or hail calls and this rolling, rolling chatter, feeding chatter, whatever it is. And it seems so complicated, and it probably is. But like Barney says in his piece, when in terms of building a foundation as a duck caller, it all boils down to really 5 notes, 5 quacks, and it's mastering that 5-note cadence that a hen mallard has, and from those 5 notes, everything else is built. And it's as duck callers, we want to. The first thing I wanted to learn was how to do that double tongue, that the feeding chuckle. So yeah. I spent day after day trying to figure it out. But when in terms of actual in the field having an impact on thing, it's those 5 notes that a hen mallard does. And then of those 5 notes, it really just starts with making that very first one. And so, Barney's recommendation was if you're a younger caller or somebody that's just starting out, master that 1 quack. And then from there, you can build on to 5. And then from there, you can do the hail calls, and you do the comeback calls, and you can do the lonesome hen or the raspy hen or whatever it may be. But it all starts with those 5. And, just talking about it gets me excited. Honestly, it makes me want to go grab my calls and fiddle around for a little bit. But it's kind of a start simple idea, and he's got some ideas in the piece about the sound to make and things like that. And there are a lot of different theories on what to say into the call, and Barney's is a voot, and I think he uses that idea of with the V at the beginning, because a V is something that you actually have to speak. You have to actually say that letter, say that sound. And in a duck call, you can't just blow air through it. It's not just you actually make that vocalization into the call. And so that's why he recommends using that VOOT, voot, to learn that quack. And so it starts simple. And then from there, you can build a repertoire of sounds that you can use in the field and be a more effective hunter. But it all starts with that one quack. And like I said, that 5-note cadence that a hen mallard makes.
Yeah. And that's literally, kind of, I touched on it in the intro. That's really a basic skill, but it's something that transitioned into literally the lifetime skill. And that's, as you get your greeting calls, your comeback calls, your hail calls, and then you're getting into the feeding calls. And that's something that every hunter probably, goes through at their own pace. Just on a funny note, I've seen some people out there and a lot of young hunters that and I think it's because the marketing machine gets them or whatever, but you see them, they've got this lanyard of like 9 calls and they can't blow one of them. And it's like, you got to start at the basics. You got to go back to the very beginning of basics before you start, getting, a whole lanyard full of calls. Get one and get one that you can use and one that you can make these sounds effectively. And I'm kind of the same way as you. I get excited about it. And one thing I do, I wish I was a better caller, but I get by. I limp by. I guess I do enough to get by. Let's say that. But I always know there's always room for improvement every year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the duck call industry likes those lanyards full of the different calls. There's no doubt about that. But I usually have, I always have a short reed goose call on there. I always have a whistle on there for pennies and for widgeon and green-wing teal and whatnot. And Drake mallard call. But I usually only have maybe one, maybe two duck calls on my lantern at a time. And whether I have a single read on there for more of a competition style call for big water situations or big wind situations. And I usually have a double read just because it's a call that I'm really comfortable with, and I know I can make the sound that I want whenever I want it. And other guys I know are doing more of the Mondo style, the cut down style calls for different reasons, but you find one that fits you. And, if there's one other tidbit of information that I would give or a recommendation I would give is that, learning how to be a better duck caller only happens if you actually try it out in the field. And I know there are, times where you maybe don't feel comfortable doing it, but getting yourself into situations where you can go out, be around birds and watch their reaction to what you do. That's the only way you learn how to be a duck caller. You're not going to learn it by watching a YouTube video. You're not going to learn it by listening to a tape. The only way you're going to learn how to do it is to be actually out in the field and watch what those birds do to a certain sound. And that's the only place you can learn how to do it. Yeah,
that's a good point. A lot of the best duck callers that I know are also really, really avid hunters. They spend a lot of time, even when they were young, they spent a lot of time calling, calling and watching how birds react and knowing the right cadence to hit at the right time. And that's a lot, calling to the birds, not necessarily at the birds is something that is a lifetime skill to achieve, and something that is kind of the pinnacle of becoming a duck hunter is being a caller. I'm a big fan of the whistles, and I think a lot of different people have their own, personal preferences, but a lot of it also is regional, like where are you hunting? The guys down in Louisiana don't need a lanyard full of mallard calls. That's just not, it's South Louisiana, I should say. But if I'm hunting out in, the Sacramento Valley in California, man, your focus is probably going to be on green wings, pintails. And so you're really going to have a lot more variation to your calls rather than just the simple greeting call, comeback call, things like that. But I think that's one thing for people to keep in mind. It is regional. So, if you want to pick up a whistle or pick up, do something that works for you when you're duck hunting. And like you said, you're only going to learn if you're doing it when you're duck hunting.
Yeah, exactly. A whistle is a good option too, for if you got a young kid in the blind, for something for him to fiddle around with. And especially if you have a Drake mallard call or something like that, if you can, obviously you don't want him blowing a whistle like a referee on a basketball court or something like that. But, it's something simple that a younger hunter or an inexperienced hunter can do as well.
Yeah. And it gets them super involved in the process. Yep. That's a really good point. The next step, as part of the lifetime skills of the waterfowl hunter, It's an obvious one. Shooting. Becoming a better shooter is not always just learned at the range. Kind of explain how, the people that you talk to about this, and also, how they made some recommendations for really learning how to shoot waterfowl.
Yeah. So the importance of shooting is pretty obvious. Yeah. But the importance of developing that skill, is something that, you're only going to get so many opportunities in the field. You may have days where you only have 2 or 3 shots and you want to make the most of those. And it's not that it's always necessarily about putting birds on the strap, but if you go duck hunting to shoot ducks, it's part of it, and so when you only have so many opportunities throughout the morning, you want to make sure you use the most of them. And it's something where before a hunt, you want to spend some time with your gun. You want to make sure that you're comfortable with it. You want to make sure that you're running. If you've got an idea on just because a certain shot shell manufacturer comes out with a brand new load, the latest and greatest non-tox load for ducks and geese, just because it looks fancy, it looks something that you'd love to use, it may not shoot really well through your gun. That's something you're going to want to find out before the season starts by whatever shells that you plan on shooting throughout the year, putting them through different combinations of chokes and a combination of choke and shell through your gun to see which one patterns the best. That's something that you don't want to necessarily have to try to figure out in the field. And so, it's the more time you invest before the hunt, the better off you are in the field. And I'll add to this that one of the things that I have learned kind of the hard way when it comes to shooting is that, you stick with what works, and this is something that you and I have talked about before. I think about talking about blue-winged teal, about teal season, and, a tip from Tony Vandermoor down in Missouri about, you stick with a gun and a choke combination throughout the year that works for you. When you've got it dialed in, and I know the gun and I know the load and I know the choke, for me personally, when I'm shooting that combination, I don't care what situation I'm in. I don't care what the weather's like. I don't care what kind of birds I'm hunting. I know that gun. I know how it shoots, and I know where to put that barrel to be successful. And so, as tempting as it is, and this is a thing I've learned the hard way about trying new guns and trying to find maybe one gun that can do it all for me or whatever it may be. I keep going back to the old standby because it's what works for me. And over time, I'd like to try some different things, but I know I got to spend some time with that, outside of the blind, outside of the marsh or the field, whatever, to build to be comfortable with it. So use what you know and then practice with it, outside before the hunt. Those are the 2 big tips.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. As I've, spent some time the last few years kind of mentoring a younger guy from my neighborhood who wanted to get into hunting. And really the first step with him was getting him comfortable with the gun. And getting, he didn't have a gun, so he was kind of borrowing, and I'd take him shooting, and he was a little hesitant. And over the years, and then he got himself an 870 pump, and and then as that progression of, it wasn't just shooting necessarily, it wasn't just pulling the trigger, it was everything about that process that kind of brought him around. And it was all about him just spending more time with the gun as far as loading and unloading and mounting and, the whole process. And I think that's a good thing that you brought up, is just being comfortable. And I kind of saw that, and I guess I took it for granted with me because I shoot a lot. So, I just looked at it as like, hey man, here's how you do this. Here's how you do this. And as we're going through that, it took him a lot longer than what I thought. I was like, what's he doing? Or, I'm not saying it to him necessarily, and he, missing all the time. And he was frustrated about that. And then as he familiarized himself with the loads and with, the recoil, everything about it is something that, people over time, it really becomes the progression of shooting, and not only just shooting, like I mentioned, it's actually shooting a duck or a goose in the field. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key to kind of what even your article was lending itself to.
Absolutely. Being comfortable, being confident with it. I mean, there's a saying in the Old West, beware the man with one gun. I mean, when you're comfortable with that gun and you feel confident with it, you're going to be on the market, you're going to be more successful.
All right. And the next topic in this lifetime skills for the waterfowl hunter is kind of the subhead that you provided on here was called scouting the big picture. And it's really a look at when you're scouting, you're not necessarily just looking for the ducks and the geese. There's so much more to scouting and learning how to scout for ducks. And we could probably do an entire podcast strictly on this topic. I mean, we could talk for days about scouting, but kind of go into the way that you were kind of painting this picture as adding this as one of the skills that every waterfowl hunter must have.
Yeah, absolutely. You go out scouting, like I did this morning, going out scouting for birds and looking for them in their, whether they're going out feeding or on the water, whatever it may be. Whenever you come across a concentration of mallards or Canada geese or snow geese or whatever it is, that's just one moment in time in their daily routine. And it's an important one. It's probably the one moment that you start with in terms of trying to formulate a hunt and a plan and those things. But it's just one moment in time in their day. And when I talk about scouting the big picture, the idea is that you are not just trying to figure out that one moment in time, but you're trying to put every other piece to that puzzle together, so that you may discover along the way that there is a situation or a point in their day-to-day routine that works a whole lot better for you, where maybe you're going to be able to hide better, or you're going to be able to be on the X, or you're going to be able to, use the wind and the sun to your advantage more, whatever it may be. And so the idea then is to, like I say, if you find a group of birds in a field or whatever, try to figure out where they've been before that, and then try to figure out where they're going to go after that. And, just for instance, if I find a group of Canada geese that are using a silage field or cornfield here in South Dakota, and I discover, I see 500 of them out in the field, which is it's a decent number. It's not a ton, but it's a pretty decent number. And I'm making plans to hunt that the next morning. And the next morning, before I do that, I decide, I'm going to check this out one more time just to make sure, whatever. And I get out there the next morning before they come in, and I discover that those 500 birds are coming to that field in 2 huge flocks. And all of a sudden, that's really not, if it's my only option, fine, that's what it is. And I've got 2 opportunities to make some shots, whatever it is. But a field of 500 then isn't maybe as appetizing to me, or as doesn't look quite as good as a field with maybe 200 in it, but they're coming in packs of 4 or 5 at a time, or singles or pairs. And so it's just kind of getting this understanding of what these birds are doing, how they're coming to a field, where they're going to it afterward. And it's once you can figure out those different pieces of the puzzle, it can open up different windows of opportunity for you. And so it's, again, this idea of don't just focus on that one point of the day. See what else you can figure out, and because the more you know, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. And, that is a very good point. And even that changes, that big picture gets even bigger as you look at it from hey, there's a weather system coming, and you can learn what these birds do on different systems. Maybe it's a very light north breeze, or maybe it's a 25 mile an hour northwest blow. That what are these birds doing here? What are they doing when there's snow? The difference between an inch of snow and 6 inches of snow, especially with Canada geese, can really change up the way these birds react to different things. And that's part of that scouting big picture. You can learn more about this and more about the birds and the habitats they're using by really taking I'd like to always say, like a 50,000 foot level perspective, looking at it on a huge scale, rather than just, hey, there's 8 ducks over there and I'm going to go hunt there.
Exactly. And Chris, and that's a good way of looking at it too. And, I talk a lot so much about, in South Dakota, my way of hunting is a lot different than it is in other parts of the country, and for better, for worse in some ways. And so, for hunters that are tied into a lease, and this is where they're going to be going no matter what, you can still apply this idea, like you said, in terms of paying attention to all the different factors that go into a hunt, whether that's wind direction or weather or the amount of sun or whatever it may be. Just the more that is gonna help you out in the long run, and it may help you determine where you're gonna set up that day, or if the wind is blowing from a roost area, you're going to need to set up further away, from where they're, so you're not spooking them off the roost or whatever it may be. But just as you're learning on how to scout, learn part of that process is looking at all the different factors that impact that, that impact those birds on a day-to-day basis. And the more pieces of that puzzle that you can put together, the better off you are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. That is certainly, life lessons that, some hunters may not have the full, understanding of this just because of the different habitats that they hunt. But no, I always talk to guys, especially guys from the South, who it is a lot of leases. It is a lot of, it's not necessarily everything that they're doing is not based on that scouting, but then they want to take a trip up to North Dakota and do a freelance hunt. And I'm like, man, you got something coming to you that you're going to have to learn real quick.
Yeah.
So that's something for hunters to keep in mind is really building that lifetime skill of scouting. The next one on your list here is creating motion in the decoys. This is no secret. This is no, eye-opening. We're not breaking any news here that motion is the key to success on a lot of occasions and really most occasions, I should say. But what were the first kind of steps that you kind of talked to here, the experts saying, how to get started in doing this and learn how to use motion as much more than just, hey, let's throw out a mojo.
Yeah, exactly. So, I talked to Rusty Creasy, and Rusty, manages the Coca-Cola Duck Club in Arkansas, this storied place. And it's someplace I'd love to go myself someday. And Rusty, when I talked to him, he talked about how it's one of the first things that he learned was the importance of motion in the decoys. And this is long before, spinning wing decoys were around. And, you always hear stories about guys hunting flooded timber that are kicking the water to create that ripple on the water, that sound of ducks actively, in the water. And it's, and I think that's what Rusty was hinting at, in his, some of his comments in the article that, when you look at ducks on the water, or geese for that matter, there's motion. They're moving, they're feeding, they're dabbling, they're tipping up, they're whatever it may be. And so as hunters, obviously you want to try to emulate that in your decoy spread. And so, when we think about motion in the decoys today, so much of it is motorized decoy. And that is certainly true. That is revolutionized hunting in a lot of ways. But Rusty kind of made the comment, or that you use that motion though in the same way that you use a duck call, in that there are times where a lot of it works, and there are times where a little of it works, and there are some times where maybe none of it. Maybe later in the season, birds are used to motion, whether it's a spinning wing or whatever, and that it's something that you're going to have to cut way back, and so. His ideas, again, it comes back to when you're talking about motion, paying attention to how the birds react to it, just like you would with a duck call, and watching their reaction to it. And, the tool that he mentions, and the tool that so many duck hunters mention, that even though, some of your best duck callers that we have, Jim Ronquist is one from R&T that I think of all the time, where he puts his duck call away and he pulls a jerk string. And that's sometimes your best call is just that little added bit of motion. I remember, it's something that I didn't use growing up a lot, but probably about 15, 20 years ago, maybe I started using a jerk string, and I put it out for the first time, really not really thinking much about it. It was, something I'd never tried before. And I was hunting some early season ducks in South Dakota, and duck call is just not effective. They're just not really social at that point of the year. And I was trying to I was hitting these mallards and pintails with my best stuff, and nothing was working. So finally I did. I put the duck call down and I started yanking on that jerk string. Same place, the same time I would normally hit a duck with a duck call, the same point in their, when they're working, swinging the decoys, and all of a sudden there was reaction. And, I went from 0 to 60. I mean, it was birds not paying attention to me, all of a sudden that they were, and it was just that little added bit of motion in the decoys. And so, it's like I say, it's something that when you're learning how to do it, pay attention to how the birds react to it, and then and go off of that. Sometimes you need more, sometimes you need less, and sometimes you can leave your duck call alone, you can leave your mojo alone, and just like I say, add some motion, whether it's kicking a boot in the water or yanking on that jerk string.
Yeah, and there's so many options for that. I'm a big fan of the jerk string. I'm a big fan of the jerk string, even in some of these large rice fields that I hunt in down in Arkansas. A lot of guys rely on the spinning wings, but if you drive across Arkansas in the middle of duck season, you can drive down roads and you can see every single blind because there's 2 or 3 dozen decoys and a spinning wing decoy right out front. And so with the jerk cords, what I'm going for is really just giving them something different. But it's all falls under that motion, that the whole aspect of motion and, to each their own and each, whatever people use for motion, but it's just a good reminder that motion is so key, to success that, there's so many different ways to do it. And even more so, as technology gets better and all of these, different companies are coming out with spinning wings and, spitters and, flappers and flippers and, whatever, there's so many different options that, and that's why these companies are coming out with that, because they all know that, motion is key.
Exactly.
So the last one on your list for lifetime skills, and I thought this was, such a great addition to this list and this article, and something that a lot of people forget about is it's people skills, the ability to communicate with other people, successfully, I guess I should say. Kind of explain why this people skills was added to this, monumental list of lifetime waterfowling skills.
Absolutely. So you think about a day of an average day for a duck hunter. And it doesn't matter if you're in South Dakota, or Arkansas, or Oregon, or wherever you're at. Chances are you may be alone, but chances are somewhere along the line somebody else had a hand in that experience for you, whether that's a landowner, maybe a buddy that's lent to you his decoys for the day or blind for the day, or you've partnered up and you've purchased a big A-frame together or whatever it may be. Or maybe there's other people in the field. Maybe you're sharing a public area with 2 or 3 other groups of hunters. It's this idea of people skills is that you are impacted by others in your hunting experience almost every time you go out. And so by developing people skills and communication, kindness, flexibility, those things that are important, the things that we try to teach our kids, honesty, those same skills that help us in life in general, they, as a duck hunter, as a waterfowl hunter, they help you there too. And, you take a landowner, for instance, if you're in a position where you're able to scout and find a place to hunt, knock on a door or make a phone call and get permission to hunt, it's extending a thank you afterward, or a gift. Some people will share something, or it's a simple thank you card. That's one of the things that I try to do with hunters or with landowners that give me permission to hunt, is that in addition to giving them something, if they would like that, whether it's a gift card to a restaurant or something, I just try to send them our family Christmas card at the end of the year, just as a way to say, thanks for letting me access your ground. I know you don't have to do that, and I really appreciate it. And then beyond that, keeping those communications, that line of communication open, so that the next time they see or hear from you isn't the night before that you want to, shoot mallards in their cornfield. And so it's an issue of respect, and it's an issue of kindness and appreciation. And so, landowner is one area of that. And like I mentioned before, being able to include friends in on a hunt and pool resources. I know that's especially important maybe when you're hunting snow geese or these other gear intensive, pursuits. Being able to have a group of buddies that you can count on to help you scout or help you put together a decoy spread or whatever it may be. And then probably the outside of the landowner one that's probably the most important, though, is just dealing with other hunters and being respectful. And it's, we've all had instances maybe where we've run into people that didn't behave the way that we would like them to. And chances are we've probably behaved at times where we know we could have done better. And so it's recognizing that, we're all kind of in the same fight together. And if I'm within shorter distance of another group that's hunting, a safe distance, but a shorter distance, that if I see birds that are working them, that I'm not going to be trying to call them off of them, or just being respectful of their experience. And so it's not something you would necessarily think of as a waterfowl hunter, but people skills, I think, are right up there as some of the most important, skills that you can work on and hone and have as a hunter.
Absolutely. And I think the landowner, relationships is a good point to bring out, but my key that I take in on that is really being kind to other hunters. And it all just comes down to just don't be a jerk. I mean, I've been at, everything from boat ramps to, local diners where guys are arguing about stuff and, they're upset and, one guy did something that another guy didn't like or whatever. And just being mindful of what you're doing out there. And like you said, we're kind of all on the same team here. And really the reality is there's not a lot of us. And so it's something to keep in mind as far as people skills. And another thing that I would add to this is being kind and treating others with respect as far as even, representing an entire group of people as far as being considered a waterfowl hunter. I mean, I spend a lot of time in Arkansas during duck season and you'll go into a gas station and, 8 out of the 10 people in there are duck hunters, and it. And everyone in there knows it. The people who own the gas station know it. And people have to remember that they're representing an entire group of people with some of the actions that they make. And I've done a lot of times where I'm just like, hey man, you guys having any luck? And guys are just like, why would I tell you? So I'm not asking for your spot. I'm just being friendly here.
Yeah.
And so it's something to keep in mind. And in the field, out of the field, it's definitely on the top of the list of things for people to know. I'm sure we could probably do, like I said, another entire podcast of stories, probably just stories that you've had and stories that I've had that would make you cringe looking back on it. Like, oh man, I can't believe that guy was so rude, but maybe we'll save that for another day.
Yeah, no, we sure could. But yeah, absolutely. I agree. You have an impact on the entire waterfowl community by your actions, whether that's leaving trash or not closing the gate or being rude to a landowner or whatever it is. We're all better off if we are if we know we're in it together. Absolutely.
That's our public service announcement for the day. Don't be a jerk in the field.
That's right.
Well, John, this has been great. This is a great list. People can find this article. It's called Lifetime Skills for the Waterfowl Hunter. It's on ducks.org. I'm sure you'll see it as we, progress throughout the season, and we'll post this kind of stuff on our social media site. But John, thanks for joining me today. It's been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my guest, John Pullman, Ducks Unlimited magazine contributor, for joining me today and going through this great article of lifetime skills for waterfowl hunters. I'd like to thank our producer, Clay Baird, for doing a great job getting the podcast out. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the Ducks Unlimited podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.